Welcome to the Diversity in STEM podcast, where we interview leaders in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to help inspire students of all ages. My name is Joe Kent, and I'm the Director of Education for the National Atomic Testing Museum. My guest today is Dr. Gabriel Montaño. Dr. Montaño is a native New Mexican born and raised in Gallup, New Mexico, and has spent his academic and professional careers in the Southwest. Dr. Montaño attended New Mexico State University, where he received his Bachelors of Science in Biology in 1997. He then attended Arizona State University, where he completed his PhD in the lab of Dr. Robert Blankenship in 2002. Upon completion of his PhD, Dr. Montaño accepted a postdoctoral appointment in biomaterials design at Los Alamos National Laboratory, where he was an intelligence community postdoctoral fellow. And in 2005, he accepted a position as a technical staff member with the newly developed Department of Energy Center for Integrated Nanotechnologies, where he remained until the fall of 2017. In the fall of 2017, Dr. Montaño moved to Northern Arizona University and led the creation of the Center for Materials Interfaces in Research and Applications, and he continues to serve as MEDA Chief Scientist. In addition, he led the establishment of the Department of Applied Physics and Material Sciences at NAU, and serves as department chair. In the spring of 2019, Dr. Montaño was also selected to serve as the NAU Diversity Fellow and oversees all diversity initiatives at the university. Hello, Dr. Montaño. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. It is a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you for the opportunity and the invite.
Absolutely. We're so excited to have you on and to talk about the work you're doing at Northern Arizona University. Both in terms of diversity in the STEM fields, but also the work that you're doing, as a professor and as a chief scientist.
Absolutely.
So one thing that we always like to do at the beginning is to give our listeners a chance to learn more about our guests. So in order to get to know you a little bit better, would you like to tell a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I think you covered it pretty well, but if there's one thing I like to share with students in particular, but also just folks that aren't necessarily in the STEM field, it's there's ideas of what a scientist is and isn't. And the thing I hear from people upon finding out I'm a scientist is typically, wow, I never would have guessed that, and we could talk about this, and there's probably some good and bad with that, to be said. The good is, I think, folks who know me kind of see me as just a typical person. I'm a big sports fan. I got my VGK shirt on today. We got a big game 6 tonight that I'm pretty psyched about.
Absolutely.
And I grew up, playing sports, and that was always has always been a big part of my life. Also a musician. I've been playing since I was a kid. All through grad school, was playing in bands and solo on my own too. And it's been a huge part of my life. Kind of keeps me grounded. And so I'm just pretty, I have a lot of interests outside of science. I got a limited vocabulary, so I probably don't speak above people's heads very often.
That's never a bad thing.
No. And I was, very traditionally trained as a public school kid and a state school kid. So I feel pretty comfortable in all circumstances and situations. I love people that come from different walks of life and love talking to them about their jobs, because I always tell people, well, yeah, maybe you can't do my job, but I can't do yours either. So, it's what we do. It's not what defines us. On the bad side of that, there's probably still a social stigma or association with what a scientist looks like too, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not me. It's typically a white male, and the reason is because we still have 80% of white men in STEM as STEM professionals, and so there's we're trained to think what a scientist looks like, and it has a certain look, and so. But yeah, I there's a lot of things in science. I feel honored and privileged to be a scientist and work in this area, but there's a lot more to me, and there's a lot more to, I think, most scientists when you're talking to them about what makes it tick.
Well, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's the thing, especially with our podcast, as we're continuing, we're having different guests from different backgrounds, and what they're talking about are different. They're so much more than just what they do. They love, like you said, you love music, and you love sports and things like that, and it's like it's a facet of you, but it's not everything
Right.
It doesn't encompass all of your waking moments. So it's cool to see that the fact that it's, you know, it's just one component of a larger thing. So it's nice to hear that you have that experiences and there's other hobbies as well. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think it's important for students to think about that too, especially when they're thinking about it. It's like, you know, no, you know, scientists, we don't just live, eat, and breathe this stuff. You know, we're normal people, and so I hate for them not to think of that they could be part of this, you know, because they absolutely can be.
Absolutely, and that was the driving force of the podcast, is just so students and parents and teachers and guardians can really see that there's not a one size fits all. There's not one, like you said, the what we think of when we think of a scientist. They can see themselves and learn about people from, you know, similar backgrounds, and hopefully inspires them too. And that was a big driving force. So it's always great to chat about that stuff. And now, talking about your work as a scientist, we talked about your degree in biology. Now, what got you interested in biology? And I'm sure you get this question a lot, is how did that take you from, you know, studying biology to get to applied physics? And what was that trajectory like?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. It's funny. I've had a very non-traditional kind of trajectory through science, but I tell students in some ways it was intentional, not initially, but it was, as I started exploring, it became intentional. I actually went to college to become a journalist. I mean, and this goes back to my music interest. I wanted to be, at the time, you know, the editor for Rolling Stone, or now it would be Mojo, probably Mojo or Q, you know, probably Mojo. I think it leads toward Mojo. But you know, that was my real interest. I love to write, and I love to creative write, and so actually, you know, I spent a lot of time and ended up with a minor in creative writing too, because I just love writing. But you know, as is typical, I got kind of nervous about pursuing a degree. I didn't think, I was worried about failing. You know, that maybe I don't know if I'm good enough and to be a writer. And the truth of the matter is, you start looking at careers, you know, and this happens with a lot of students, that if you're not coming from a place of privilege, you got to figure out how to get a job that's going to support, and you know, and you got to think about supporting things sometimes beyond just yourself, and early. And so I became unnerved at the concept of actually pursuing a degree in journalism, that, you know, I didn't want to fail and have to start over. Around the same time, I was always good at science, and I was still taking some science courses. And I had a professor that in my zoology course asked me if I'd ever thought about you know, doing research in science. I said, no, not really. Well, he took me into his lab, and this is Dr. Peter Hood, who's still a great friend and colleague, and just a tremendous mentor. And he got me involved in research, and then he put me up into a program called the MARC program, which is an access for students, typically underrepresented students, to be able to do research and get paid. And so in a few months, I found myself being paid to do research as an undergraduate in biology. Now, the interesting part was, I realized I didn't like biology, actually, the research. I think it's really cool. I'm still fascinated. And, you know, when you do work like mine, which is really now biophysics or materials or biomaterials, all the questions we ask are still inspired by biology, because it still fascinates me. I don't know how life works, but I didn't actually like doing the actual work. I didn't like the lab work that was in part of biology. It's, sometimes people talk about having good hands. I don't have them. Not when it comes to bio work. It was never natural. I would fight just to get a PCR to work. So I wasn't good at it, and I didn't really enjoy it. But the change for me actually happened with a RU program. So these are NSF programs, these research experiences for undergraduates. And they allow students to go and do some research over the summer someplace else. And there was a poster up in our department office for this RU program in scanning probe microscopy at Arizona State University. And so it had a couple things that were really intriguing to me. The poster looked really cool. I had no clue what scanning probe microscopy was, but it was more physics-based and sounded interesting to me. And it was in Tempe, Arizona, which Mill Avenue was really hopping at the time. There was a great music scene. So all this stuff sounded perfect to me, and like a great way to spend my summer. That RU program and that summer changed my life. And it's not hyperbole to say that. You know, 25 years later, my specialty is scanning probe microscopy. Most of my lab and what I'm known most for is my work in biomaterials and scanning probe microscopy. And so I found research that I loved. It was more physics-based. It was more, again, and then I was doing more biophysics with it, but it's a physics-based application. And I thought, wow, I love this. And that just changed my whole course. From then, I went and pursued a PhD that was more biochemistry, biophysics, and then on to materials. And it just went on from there. But I started finding my niche, and at some point switched from this idea of feeling like I didn't really belong to going, wow, I actually really like this stuff and I'm decent at it. So it was, and so, but you know, bio always played a point and still does in my life that I'm intrigued by the questions that you ask in biology, and I still can't figure it out, you know, and so it pushes me every day.
Well, it's incredible that you're able to find something that really incorporated a lot of those loves. And we often talk about, taking those opportunities and sometimes, not being afraid to get into something that maybe we're not sure of, or just to take those risks and take those opportunities, because sometimes, like you said, it changed everything for you. It showed like, this is what I wasn't a big fan of with biology, but I still loved it. But this over here, with the more the physics and being able to tie all that together, having the music scene available, it sounded like it was just a happenstance that worked out perfectly for you.
Yeah, the other thing that I think is a really big point that I try to make with students too, especially if they're coming into biological sciences, is that typically to get a degree in biology, it's a limited amount of math. And the only reason I was able to make this transition into more biophysics, biochemistry, biophysics was that my advisor didn't let me take the limited amount of math. They made me take Calc 1, Calc 2. They made me take Calc-based physics 1 and 2 and PChem. So they set me up so I could make that transition. And I talk to students about this all the time. If you think you might want to do that, that's the great limiter. If they don't have the math background, because math is kind of a language, it makes it for a really difficult transition. So I'm always encouraging them that, I don't care if it says you can just take this business-based calculus. No, take 2 semesters at a minimum of calc to set yourself up, because it'll just allow you to be a little bit more movable into whatever area you want to go to.
And that's so critical, to have that flexibility and be able to fit into different rules, because it's life works out funny sometimes. There might be an opportunity that comes along and you just want to be prepared for that possibility. And it's great that you're talking about the professors that pushed you and worked with you and inspired you. Now, were there any family members, other teachers or experts in the field who encouraged and motivated you to go down this path as well, or keeping you on the path?
It's a great question, my family, when I think about it, they gave me the greatest gift that you could actually give a young person. And it was one that not all can. I'll just want to say that first of all, but they made me believe from a very young age that college wasn't a pipe dream. I never doubted that I was going to go to college. And now I don't come from a lineage of people going to college. I'm one of now 5 cousins, I think, on my mom's side that have college degrees. One just received, and we're so proud of her. Went back to school and was able to do that. But and this is out of, I don't know how many there were, 20 something, and we all came from 2 families. And we were the families or the kids that we felt like college was always going to happen. We never doubted whether we'd have this opportunity to go. The thing that I never knew was that they never knew how they were going to pay for it. They didn't have this plan. There was no college fund set up for me and my brother to attend college. They never let us know that. They just made it plain as day that we were going to go to college. So I didn't think about it. And that was probably the greatest gift that they could have given me. And so from a very young age and all the way through my degree pursuits, it's always just been a constant push, but also just encouragement to keep going, You can do this. And so I can't say enough about how they set me up into doing that. And beyond my family, it's been a series of just unbelievable, fortunate mentors too. And this goes back to before I even went to college, but extended. I had 3 primary mentors in college: Peter Hood, Bob Blankenship, and Andy Shreve as my postdoc advisor. And all 3 were just tremendous in terms of supporting me, not just in becoming a scientist, but knowing that I had these other passions and I wanted to pursue, and they didn't stymie me. I never once heard, no, you can't focus on that. I need you working on this experiment. They knew that, what made me was this combination of ultimately social justice to a large degree, diversity in STEM, but also pursuit of scientific excellence. And they encouraged that. And so I've been very fortunate in my life to just have tremendous people that have constantly afforded me these opportunities.
Well, it's amazing to hear that you had a lot of support and positivity, especially like you said, it's, maybe they weren't sure how they would do it, but they always made sure that you knew that that was something you could do, that's something that you could strive for, and having that support and mentors to really just reinforce that positivity, and also that, you know, yeah, you can do it. It's not going to be easy, but you can do it, and you can do this. This is a reality for you. And oftentimes that's what we need. That's the main thing. If we know that's something that we can do, that's available to us, and we have people there supporting and being our, you know, rallying around us, that goes a long way. And especially, you know, at a young age, knowing that, you know, you have this love and big support system around you, and that goes a long way, regardless of what field you're going into, right?
No, that's absolutely right. And, you know, it becomes even more important in fields where you don't look like everybody else, you know, and you're always the only one in the room. And so I agree 100%. Yeah, it's so important. Networks are so important. And, you know, we talk to students about this all the time. It's not just networks and you know, we need to do a better job about this in the scientific field community to students what networks are, because too often we place these networks as just, oh, you got to find this person's really important in the field and they're going to push it. Yeah, but you also need networks of support. You know, you need people that are going to be there in your corner, that are going to help you understand and figure out how to maneuver and matriculate through as a professional scientist.
That's an amazing, that's an awesome point. That, you know, the realizing that it's not just about in furthering the career, but also building that network of people who I keep using the term, but rallying together, being there, being able to grow as a group, and to constantly support and be there for the next generation, right? To be able to then bring them up as well, because that all trickles down, and you need to have that. And especially if we hope to make more change and continue that evolution of what we're seeing in diversity in STEM. And I know we're going to get to that in a little bit, but you want to every generation, you want them to be able to reach even higher. And in order to do that, you need to build that system. So that's incredible. And now I understand you spent some time at Los Alamos National Laboratory as an intelligence community postdoctoral fellow after getting your PhD. Now, how was your experience transitioning from graduate school to a laboratory setting? I know we talked about, you know, you transitioning from biology to biophysics. And what was it like going from graduate school to a laboratory setting? That must have been interesting.
Yeah, and it really was. And again, this is a perfect example of just having mentors that understand the system. Even though I grew up in New Mexico, which is where Los Alamos is based, I never actually contemplated going to work there. I didn't have a good sense of understanding of what it was, or we just knew it was this lab of really smart people on the hill, that the bomb was built there, and you know, and so I had a limited understanding of it. We took a field trip to the museum when I was in high school, and you know, they have the replicas of the bombs, and they walk you through nuclear history and all these really amazing things like you all have over there. I can't wait to come visit your center. But I didn't, beyond that, I had a pretty limited knowledge of it. What it was again, my boss at the time, Bob Blankenship, and his networks, there was a meeting going on where they were talking about creating this new center of nanotechnology. And Bob sent me there, and he said, look, Gabe, I think you should go here. I think there might be some opportunities there, and I just want you to check it out. And so he sent me to go do that, which is what good mentors do. They provide opportunities. And there I met Andy Shreve at a meeting, and it was funny. I didn't realize until I went home that I just had an on-the-spot interview with Andy. He was just such a nice guy, and just started talking to me and asking me questions, and we had about an hour-long conversation. And then I went back home, and Bob asked me how to go. I said, oh, Brad, I met this guy, Andy Shreve. And he said, yeah, I told Andy that I was sending you and I wanted you to meet him. And he's like, how was the interview? I didn't know I had an interview. A couple of weeks later, Andy contacted me and asked me if I'd be interested in pursuing or performing a postdoc there. And I was floored. You know,
it's always a good feeling when it doesn't come across as an interview, right? It's just sort of a natural flow.
Yeah, it just made it, you know, one of the easy things for me to figure out was that, yeah, this is somebody I want to work with, because I want to learn from him. And, you know, the transition there, it's an intense atmosphere. All of a sudden you're going from a place where, you know, Arizona State, really, really incredible. I went there to pursue photosynthesis, and it's one of the world's leaders in terms of photosynthesis. You got, you know, a ton of the best people in the world pursuing it there. But then when I transitioned over to Los Alamos, it's just a ridiculous who's who of scientists. And you go there and everybody's from Cornell or MIT or Harvard and Stanford. And I walk in as a state school kid. It's intimidating to try to figure out how you fit in. There was at every step, you know, one of the things I always talk to students when you're coming from where you don't have a lineage of, say, PhDs or MDs or something, you're just trying to figure out the game half the time. It takes you twice as long sometimes to get up to speed because you're not even sure what the game is, where other people have figured it out. And that was the case in transitioning to Los Alamos, just trying to figure out how to work at a different level and how it worked. But it was a tremendous experience and opportunity, and all the way through my career there, I don't regret a day having spent my most of my career up till now there. It's just an absolutely tremendous place.
Well, that's great to hear, and it's great to hear that, especially with, you know, like you said, the lineage and things like that, that it's that you were able to get up to speed with that. And did you have anybody there who really kind of helped you kind of catch up to that level, like you said, with the, you know, the lineage of some of the scientists there? Who was there to really help guide you in that?
Yeah, you know, that was an interesting part in my life, or point in my life, because, you know, the biggest thing again was Andy Shreve was just a phenomenal mentor and kind of took me under his wing, and he recognized some of the things that I just was not sure about, and really helped to help me through that process. At the same point, there was a great group of young postdocs that we were all kind of going through this together, and all of whom are still friends and colleagues. And one of them, who now is the director of our center here, Mita, that I recruited to come out and join us when we were building what we're building out here. And so, you know, your networks start young and early, and there's that. But at the same time, the biggest change in my life was that I stumbled, and literally I stumbled upon an organization called SACNAS, which is Society for the Advancement of Chicanos, Hispanics, and Native Americans in Science. And I was at a Biophysical Society meeting down in San Antonio, and two folks who were very prominent in the society found me at a Minority Affairs Committee meeting, and you know, I'll never forget, one of them who ended up, who's a great friend and mentor, George Negrete, asked me, he's like, "How did we miss you?" And this is part of the issue, is that there's so few, oftentimes, of underrepresented students. They fall through the cracks all the time. They still do. And I said, I don't know. But in SACNAS, I found a world that looked like me. I found a world of scientists that were doing incredible science, but they actually looked like me. And so I found a different support network and group that really helped me gain confidence in trying to figure out how to traverse it. And part of that is that, you know, whether it's a national lab or you're in an academic setting or industry, you're going to face a lot of the same issues. And so there within SACNAS, I was able to find so many mentors and people that I could go to help me figure out how to just really navigate the system. And it changed my life. I actually was at a point where I was very much thinking about leaving science because I just didn't feel like I was getting it, and I didn't know how to get to that next level. And SACNAS basically saved my career.
You know, and that's just incredible, because one thing that we've talked to previous guests on is that, you know, there's a lot being talked about in terms of getting students from diverse backgrounds into STEM, but oftentimes what we find is there's a lack of resources to keep them involved, whether that's in school or in a career. Is that, you know, there's not a lot in place to reinforce and to support them as they're emerging into the field, right?
No, you just hit the nail on the head. I get why programs are set up the way they are, but we've had 40 years of programs of these quote unquote pipelines, which I'm not a huge fan of the term, but the idea behind that, it's one that people can understand, is that if you just get more students into the system, it's going to change. And that, you know, over a generation, you're going to see the demographics change. We know it doesn't work that way. And the biggest reason is because unless you change the culture of a system, they fall out of the system. Why? Because they don't feel like they belong. There aren't those mechanisms that for retention, for promotion, to make sure that they're not only getting into those degree paths, but that they're going to succeed. Because at some point they're just lost, and for good reason. The system is just set up in a very archaic way. And so, yeah, trying to figure out our paths and our way to support students, to find them, to identify them, and make sure that they all have equal opportunities to be successful is really important. and this is a big important point. It's not about taking opportunity away from anybody else. It's about making sure that those that can do it are provided that opportunity. Like I said, without it, I think I've done decent in my career. And without some of these groups in terms of that support network, I'd have been gone 15 years ago. And I'm glad, I'm very fortunate and happy that I was able to have that type of network.
Yeah, and it's great that you're able to then work with the next generations and be able to pay that forward, so to speak, and be able to say, as you said, I was able to succeed, but I'm sure there were those that you've met that maybe didn't have the same support and didn't have the same connections, and maybe they struggled to get through. And so, we want to make every next generation have an easier time and feel more support, right?
It's absolutely true. It's the greatest privilege of my life to be able to work with young people to help hopefully get them to there. I always tell them, I want your path to be much quicker and better than mine in terms of finding yourself. Because, one of the things when I give talks about this, and one of the things I share with students, I really didn't actually become the scientist that I am now today in terms of even my success for a long time. It was into my 30s because I was fighting against what I was supposed to be as a scientist. I was still trying to emulate what I saw as being a scientist that wasn't me. And it took me a long time to figure out, I don't think that way, but that's not a negative. My unique thought processes from my own background, which we all have, and my own experiences actually are an advantage to me because I think about it different. And I'm just trying to get students on that path to that acceptance of themselves and understanding that, your whole self, we want that in the lab because that's the effective one. You trying to be me does nothing, right? But you being you and doing what you do well, that's where you're going to knock it out of the park.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, there's plenty of people who are thinking this way, but in order to really accomplish something, you need that out of the box thinking, or just a different way of thinking from everyone else. Otherwise, what's going to be developed? What's going to change?
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely.
So talking about the success that you've experienced, from 2005 to 2017, you were a technical staff member with the Department of Energy's Center for Integrated Nanotechnologies. Now, what kind of work did you do at CINT, and how does it differ from your current position as chief scientist at the Center for Materials Interfaces and Research and Applications?
Yeah, that's a great question. CINT was amazing. Around the turn of the century, Department of Energy decided they were going to invest in these nanoscience centers across the country. And so there were 5 of them set up. And one was a joint effort between Sandia National Labs and Los Alamos National Labs. And so I was part of that inaugural team and stayed that until I left in 2017. And it was amazing because it fit me in a perfect way, but it also helped me grow in a perfect way because this was a group of scientists from all realms. You had chemists, physicists, you had engineers, you had biologists, you had all of these people coming together because the nanoscale, that's where it happens. And the intriguing thing for somebody like myself is, people will often ask, well, what's so big about nano? What's why? And it's just a length scale, but the thing is, nano is where life starts happening, where things come together. That's where self-assembly occurs, and why it was such a big push at the time. Now we're very big into quantum because we're going sub-nano, and that's a big push. But it was tremendous because I was able to work with scientists from different disciplines, and just remarkable people it helped me learn a lot, and it helped me understand even more about how you traverse multiple areas and to not pigeonhole yourself. And it started being the days of being a chemist were done or a physicist were done. You had to be comfortable working across these. Now we all have our specialties, and I think that's really important, but being able to traverse the language and the landscape of how research is done these days, it's very important to be able to do that. And that's really what it did for me. And it set me up in an ideal way for coming to create what we ended up creating here at NAU, which was MIDA, the center, because this is really a materials center, but it is interdisciplinary, where we have folks ranging from biology, chemistry, physics, mechanical engineering, computer science, all part of the center. And it was only through having experienced that at CINT, being part of different teams working with and some leadership initiatives there, that I felt confident enough to come in and build something like that, to understand how something like that would work and what types of people you would need to be part of that. And so it was the perfect training ground to build what we wanted to do here.
Well, and that's leads me into another question, which is, it's great the interdisciplinary work that's being done at META, but also there's another component too, which I think is just fantastic, where there is a diverse group. That's a driving force. It's very unique. I think, you're not going to find a lot of places like META where that is an intentional part of that program, right?
Yeah, I think we're quite unique, and the biggest reason is because we're very deliberate about it. We don't just talk about diversity and check some boxes. It's a core foundation of who we are. We are a materials research and diversity center. It's a core property and foundation of who we are and what we do, and you have to demonstrate that in multiple ways. And part of that is our leadership team, and it's all comprised of women and underrepresented minorities. Our faculty are over 50% are women and underrepresented minorities. The students of our program, same thing, more than 50%. We're living it, and it's a big deal in the type of work that we do, because you typically it's a representation of less than a few percent typically in those groups, and it's unfortunate. And so you have to, students want to see themselves reflected at all levels. They want to see that they can be that they can build that. And so how you do it really matters. And so with META, we live it. We're very proud of that. We talk about it, and it's not something that we kind of dance around. And our students appreciate that, because I think we're very timely. And the reason for creating it, honestly, was it's because I felt there was a need, not only from my own experiences growing up of always feeling just like I didn't fit, but also in going across the country and talking to students at different universities. One of the things that always resonates with them is just my story and this idea of not feeling alone. Like, oh, I thought I was the only one. It's like, no, there's a lot of us. And so creating a place like that where there's an immediate sense of belonging, and that we understand these issues and the struggles, and they're core foundational parts of our training. We make sure that not just our students, but our faculty understand these issues that we're talking about today, and the roadblocks and the things that you have to overcome to actually truly gain true diversity in STEM. And because of that, yeah, I think we've created something that I hope to see more like this as we move forward, because there's a need.
Oh, and I think it's not hyperbole to say that it's absolutely groundbreaking, and that it is you're living what you talk about, what you push for, and what I think is just so great is that in addition to being able to provide the support that we were talking about, where you were able to have, but you also realized that there wasn't a lot of that for others. It's great that that's a big component for this, but it's also giving them a chance to network so early in their career. So, yeah, you have the support, but you also have this network that is expanding, and it's all starting at NAU. And that's just amazing to see. You're taking your experiences and you're providing, a safe space, a place where they can be fostered and they can grow and be their best selves, basically. And that's just fantastic.
No, you're right. And we were able to assemble a world-class team. And again, I think, if you just look at our faculty and what we've created, there's nothing lost on students that come here. They're not going to sacrifice their potential as scientists, because they're going to be trained by some of the best people in the world in doing what we do. And the reason was because the interest, I think, to a lot of those folks, including to Jen Martinez, our director, was that, look, we want to do something that is needed and it's timely to do this. And so when you provide that structure, I can't thank NAU enough for giving us the opportunity. And that was the intrigue to come here, was this idea that, yeah, Gabe, we believe in what you're talking about and we want you to do it. And that's easy. It may sound simple, but honestly, academic institutions in particular, they're resistant to change. And it can sound a little bit scary, a little bit too drastic to create a research and diversity center. But to be allowed to do that, and then to continue to pursue other efforts, NAU's been pushing me to do other things. It's been phenomenal, and that type of faith is hard to replace, and it's hard to find, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked earlier about tradition and legacy, and that sometimes goes hand in hand with that resistance to change, and say, well,
Absolutely.
we've been doing this whole time, and this is working for us, and don't rock the boat, keep it going. And so, and I think as we see the successes that come out of the program, you're definitely going to see other institutions incorporate it. But sometimes you just need to see a successful program to be willing to then incorporate that themselves.
I think you're absolutely right, and I hope you're right, because what would success look like to us here at META? It would be one that we continue to establish the programs that we have and grow them, and the support based on opportunity for students. But also, I would love to see this emulated in whatever different forms, because there's a number of different forms that I think could exist and across the country, and I think it's so needed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and continuing with the theme of diversity. In addition to your roles as chief scientist, professor, department chair, you're also the chief diversity fellow for NAU. Now, talking about students and what they encounter during their path, what do you think are the biggest roadblocks for minority students looking to enter higher education?
Yeah, there's a number of roadblocks, and it's one of the things that I think I was able to bring to the role from this is I'm not classically trained in terms of diversity or studies on that form. What I bring is kind of just my experiential perspective in the STEM field, which is one of existing as a minority, and so I spend a lot of time talking to my colleagues about what are those issues that are limiting students across the board, and there's a number of different things. It's access, it's opportunity. But it's, again, I think we've focused for a long time in academia and higher education on the access part. And it oftentimes boils down too quickly to numbers instead of people. And so when the goals are always, well, we need X number of students, it'll limit progress, because we don't need just X number of students. We need a culture that supports them. We need to actually change how and rethink. Do we have the programs that are actually going to make them successful? Are we encouraging them to be themselves and bring that in terms of helping change the institution and increase the abilities of this institution? Or are we bringing them here and asking them to then assimilate into what we consider to be what higher education is? And I'm afraid too often it's the latter. And it's not intentional. One of the things I try to do when I talk to folks too is that having spent a lot of time doing this over the last couple of decades, is to understand that often one of the biggest problems is when we have these discussions about whether it's diversity in education, diversity in STEM, et cetera, the discussion falls apart immediately, because half the room feels under attack. You're either minimizing what I think or my experience, or you're telling me I'm the problem. And it's typically, that's not the case. I don't want to think people are inherently wanting to set other kids up to fail. It's just the system's a little bit broke, and so we got to fix it. But the only way you fix it, you don't fix it by numbers. You fix it by changing the culture. You have to actually implement policy and programs that will result in change. And it's about change of how we think. It's about faculty and not just faculty, but staff and even peer students understanding these issues. And as long as we stay in this debate stage, so the best way to avoid making progress is to continue debating topics. I'll be asked questions like, well, what do you say to people that will argue that if you increase diversity, you're diluting excellence? That's a great way to maintain a false debate, because it's making these two things mutually exclusive. That diversity or inclusion is juxtaposed to excellence, and it's just a ridiculous type of statement or idea. Diversity can enhance. You're not talking about lowering the bar. You're trying to make sure that more people have the opportunity to succeed. You're going to find a lot of incredible students, but as long as we keep debating those questions, it prevents progress. And if you notice across this happens in generational times, and we're at one of those right now, where the attempt is to try to continually debate all of these issues and bring into terms, well, aren't these, and this anti-racism is racism. This is, you're undermining another group. No, as long as we stay there, we're never going to make progress. And institutions need to be willing to just understand that, look, debate is always good, but you can't have it at the cost of actually generating policy and making progress that's going to change the culture that you have.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Being stuck almost in neutral the entire time and not wanting to commit to going forward with it. And I mentioned earlier, we touched on the discussion of changing culture and in those institutions, whether it's academic or for those at organizations or businesses, but that it is, we talked about sports earlier, about how you always hear the term, oh, he really changed the team culture, the organization's culture. And it's interesting that we don't really look at that in the educational sphere, where that's just as important. We're so focused on operations and the work in the laboratories or in the classroom that sometimes we forget that building it, developing and growing and changing a culture is a great way to then support everyone, to bolster everyone, to grow as a unit, and not necessarily trying to constantly debate whether we should or not, but just, it's a benefit to everyone.
It is, and one of the things whenever I talk to whatever groups and of people, and whether it's students or faculty or a company, etc., the first thing I always ask for them to do is ask for them to take themselves out of this conversation. I'm not talking about them. I'm not really talking about me either. This isn't trying to undermine anything that they've accomplished. This has nothing to do with them. But when you do that, and then you present a very database type of conversation, you're able to then enter into a space where you can actually have a reasonable conversation, because the numbers are just what the numbers are. And one of the ways that we can look at this is, 86% of faculty hires come from 25% of the universities. Those 25% of the universities are typically around 10, 11% underrepresented. So we've set the system up to where we're just not going to diversify. Now, it's not done out of this blatant, place of racism, et cetera. It's just been instituted that this is how we do it. But it enables or prevents change, because you're never changing where people are going to be coming from, or who's actually a viable candidate for a certain position.
Yeah, and picking up with that, absolutely. We're talking about the culture needing to grow and not necessarily arguing over whose fault is it, or is it anybody's fault, or if it's intentional or not. But piggybacking off of that, do you feel that there are that universities and institutions and companies are doing enough, or do you think that they could do a lot more? And I think I know the answer to that question.
It's funny. I think they're trying. I think one of the big problems is that, again, the focus is not necessarily in the right place. One of the things when I talk to leaders, is one of the questions I have is, well, why are you wanting to do this? What's your inspiration? And, you hope that it's because it's the right thing to do. But a lot of times it's because of political pressure or from different constituents, or of feeling the need to. And sometimes that's the way things change, and it has to come. It's always a balance of the two, right? But where I hope we get is to a place where just there is a cultural acceptance of, no, it is a good thing to do. I think it's a smart thing to do. But I do think that even though there's been some advances and investments, and I would like to see I would like to see a more steady type of investment in trying to make sure, again, that it goes beyond the numbers. First thing I look for when I'm talking to or looking at different institutions or trying to help folks is, well, show me where your actual policy and investments have changed to where you can anticipate having an actual shift in culture. And if they're not there, then my hope is that they're open to trying to figure that out. And most I found are, they're just not sure how to do it. And so, it helps when they open up the room and get people that have, again, both not just experience, but some expertise in how to accomplish this into the room to do it. You got to focus on certain things. I focus on evaluation right now. That's a big one for me, because I think we evaluate it in a wrong way. And so you have to figure out what is actually preventing you from advancing, and then attack it. And I'm hopeful that we'll see more of that in the next decade or so, because I do think there is an awakening going on, that even though there have been investments or interests in seeing diversification in higher education, we're still spinning our wheels to a large degree and actually making the change necessary to see the change that or cultural shifts that are going to be necessary moving forward.
Absolutely, yeah, and I hope that's the case as well. And I think one thing that we're learning as a society is, we're rediscovering the need to listen and to ask those questions and not just talk, but just to sit back and listen to other experiences and what the needs are to actually, build that change and go towards that. Sometimes we think we have the answers and this is how we're going to do it, but if you don't incorporate the people you're trying to support, you kind of lose some of that. You maybe aren't achieving what you set out to do in the first place.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, I always say I'm not an expert on diversity. I have the experience of one thing, and it's being a cis Chicano male from Indian country, in the Southwest. And that limits my experience. So I have to talk to others and understand their experiences and to learn. And I'm open to that. And I just hope that that's something that we continue to grow as a society, is just openness and willingness to try to understand and appreciate the experiences of others.
Yeah, that is the goal. Absolutely. That would be the most ideal future scenario, is just that we talk and listen and open to that discourse.
Right.
Now, shifting back to your career, what do you feel best prepared you for your career? Is there something you wish you would have known before entering the workforce?
Yeah, the second one I'll answer first, second part of that, because one of the limitations for a lot of students that, again, don't come from a lineage of scientists. So, when I was going through my schooling, almost everybody in the lab, especially the further you get on, not when you're an undergraduate, and then you start getting into graduate school and your postdoc, and then as a professor or technical staff member, almost everybody, the further on you go, the more that the company that you're talking with or working with as your peers are second, third generation scientists, MDs, lawyers, et cetera, that of higher education, right? Advanced degrees. And what you start finding out is that they're understanding what you need to do to continue on your trajectory. And again, I said this before, but I spent, and I still do this to some degree, but especially the first 15 years or so of my career, I felt like I was just constantly playing catch up. I was trying to understand the game and how to play it. And they were already rounding the bases. They already figured it out. And so I always felt like I was just a step behind. And it did limit my progress, I think, especially early on in trying to figure out what to do. In terms of best preparing me for my career, for what I do now, I think that I've had a unique now set of experiences in that I felt really, really capable coming into what NAU wanted me to build here. And it wasn't just my work at Los Alamos, but I also, served on the board of directors of SOCNAS, and I served as president for SOCNAS. And I learned a lot about leadership and how to build things and how to advance efforts and how to really create something like what we were trying to do here. And so it goes back to even just my career trajectory, and what you mentioned at the very beginning was I've always had this mindset of, I don't care if I'm really trained to do this or if I'm supposed to do this. If there's an opportunity, I'm going to try it. And so it created a pretty unique set of experiences at this point that I think have prepared me to hold the different positions that I hold and hopefully create some good work and some good things here at NAU.
Well, that's a great point. And I think being able to pick up different skills, wear different hats, having different life experiences goes a long way, and especially in the different backgrounds that you have. And now, one thing we talked about earlier, speaking of experiences, where you've had good and bad experiences coming into the field as a person of color. Now, what are some examples of either interesting, unexpected experiences, challenges, adversity that you've encountered either in school, in getting your PhD, or in the as you went on to working for these different institutions, what are some of those experiences? And if you please share, we appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I give a talk. It's called "I Wasn't Born with a Chip, I Earned It," and I've given this across the country for the last several years. And one of the things that I talk to students about is that it wasn't a particular incident; it was a series of paper cuts. When I look back at it, and one of the reasons I think about it in that term is that there's not one eureka moment that stands out about these things. It was being an undergraduate in college and being taken out of a registration line for honor students for no reason except I didn't look like I belonged there. It was being told by a lab mate, instead of congratulations when I received a fellowship, that yeah, of course you got it. I would have too if I wasn't white. It was never having a single Chicano or Chicana professor in any of my classes as through my PhD in STEM. It was ultimately just trying to exist in a world that was foreign, and yet one that I'd chosen to live in. I was constantly trying to figure this out as I went. It was when I was first at Los Alamos, and I talked about this just a couple of weeks ago at a symposium at Los Alamos. There's a taxi service there. And just being assumed that I was a taxi driver by two scientists when I was a postdoc about ready to become a technical staff member. And it was a month ago in the grocery store, somebody coming up and yelling at me because they wanted help with their produce. I mean, it's just, wow. It creates chips, right? And like I always say, that's when I give that talk. I do have a chip on my shoulder, and I fight, whether it's bad or good, I don't know. I've come to realize that during my lifetime, this is my existence, how it's going to be. I fight to change it for my son. I fight to change it for the students that I work with. I want their experiential experience to be different. I want people not to assume one thing about them, just because of how they look. And in the STEM world, it's again, I don't think because it's people are inherently racist. It's just because we have bias. We have implicit bias. We think we know what somebody looks like and what a scientist looks like. I was saying it's just not me for whatever reason. I got semi-spiky hair and I'm dark skinned and it's just the way that the world sees me.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your experiences with us and highlighting the fact that it's oftentimes, whether it's not intentional or just something that's somebody just says offhand or an assumption that someone makes, and those, like you said, little paper cuts. And it's great for our listeners to hear that, if they're experiencing it or even if not, understanding that this is the work that's being done, and hopefully to make it so that when they come up they don't encounter it, and understanding that they're not alone, and that there's others like them in the fields and that are succeeding and thriving in it, but have also shared some of the experiences that they may have. And that's so critical to make everybody feel like they belong.
No, I absolutely agree. This isn't a one-person struggle. It's a community struggle, and it's a good one though. I think it's something that inherently, again, the idea is not to ever limit opportunity for anybody else. And when we talk about these things, it doesn't. It's just trying to make sure that when we're doing our evaluations, that we're not doing it from a place of just a bias that exists for no other reason than that's the way it is, which is kind of where we're at. We set these false standards of what we consider to be objective reasoning, and it's really not. We're humans. Everything's subjective. Mm-hmm. Even in what we're doing, hiring somebody or recruiting grad students,
or the way tests are put together. Yeah,
absolutely. There's so much subjective issue in there. We're comfortable with the idea of something being objective because then we feel like we're taking ourselves out of it. You never can, and unless we understand that you just can't do it. So having more information on the table is better than less. You're just gonna be in a tough spot.
Yeah, and I know you and I have talked before about sometimes that self-awareness is important. There's always going to be those biases, like you just said, but it's important to be aware, cognizant of those biases, and to make a change and to anticipate that and to realize that I have these, but I need to work against it, and I need to make sure that doesn't come out unintentionally or intentionally.
That's just so important, and yeah, we did talk about this. It's funny, people tell me, well, I don't have bias. Well, I know you're lying, and you may even not know it. I have bias. Of course I do. We all do. Everybody does. And that's okay. That doesn't make you a bad person or evil person. But if you can't even start there, if you can't recognize that, then you can't grow. Our biases are built from our experiences, from so much of what we learn. And that's okay. It doesn't make them inherently evil. Now, if we want to ignore them and try to justify them, that's not good. And that's where we get into trouble as a society in terms of making progress, where our job becomes to justify our position instead of trying to be open to learning. And we need to move beyond that, because that's the great limiter right now. I always talk about this. I get a little bit irritated with the term misinformation, because misinformation means that we're seeking the truth and then we're finding the wrong thing. We live in an age of affirmation is the problem. People have an idea and then they go out and find something that proves that they're right. We need to move beyond that. Until we get beyond that, we're in trouble, because we're just seeking that affirmation to tell me my thought process is the correct one and you are wrong.
Yep. That couldn't agree more. That's what you see it every day. You see people that we talked about it being open-minded and listening and to different opinions and different experiences. And it's just like that. If you live in a bubble and you're only, encountering information that reinforces your beliefs, that's so dangerous and it's so limiting, to your point.
Yeah, and in the diversity realm, I take a very scientific approach to it, which in science, you're constantly trying to prove your theory wrong. That's the only way that we can ever actually know that we did something right. We're not trying to validate it. We're trying to prove it wrong. So I take that same approach to anything I'm doing in terms of diversity, is trying to figure out, where are the holes in here? What am I missing? What am I missing from somebody else's experience that I'm not understanding? I'm constantly trying to figure that out. Because if I wasn't, I wouldn't be doing my job and I wouldn't make progress.
Yeah, no, then that's a great way to approach it. And like you said, just to see where the issues are and where we can continue and to improve. Now, the one thing we always like to ask at the end of these interviews is, do you have any advice or words of wisdom for students, their guardians or teachers who may be listening? And also, given your role as a Chief Diversity Fellow, are there any resources or organizations that you can recommend that they check out?
Yeah, one thing that I always try to tell students is, in terms of advice, is to just take advantage of every opportunity that's presented to them. That's the one thing in my life that I'm proud of. I as we talked about earlier on, I've been very fortunate in my life. I've had tremendous mentorship and support from my family and academic advisors throughout my life, and family and friends and everybody. So I've always felt very lucky, and I don't deny that at all. Again, the only thing I will take credit for in my life is those taking advantage of the opportunities that came my way, and seeking support. Seeking support does not make you weak; it makes you strong. It'll make you a stronger individual, because you're going to be able to help others to figure that out. And so I always encourage that. And for guardians and teachers, don't doubt yourself. You're doing what you're doing for the right reasons. And don't doubt that your efforts and your advice and what you want to do to help these kids and these students is not correct. Just believe in yourself, and always, if you seek to improve the lives of students, you're doing the right thing. None of us are perfect, and we all evolve, and we all figure out. I'll give advice that 10 years ago might have been something different, and that's okay. None of us are perfect, but we're all a work in progress.
Well, and thank you for saying that about support, because I think in seeking help, and I think even as adults or students in school, we're so conditioned to, I have to do it myself. I can't ask for help. I can't appear weak, but it's not weak, right? It's something that that is strong to be able to say, I need help, I need advice, I need assistance, and there's no shame in that. It only can serve to make you better.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's one thing that I think we need to get comfortable as a society with understanding and then following it.
Absolutely.
And then, and resources. Yeah, I mean, there's a ton out there. Yeah. The one thing I'll say, so I want to talk so people that are leading things out there, first of all, don't try to solve the problem yourself. There's a lot of great organizations out there. I've talked to national lab directors when they've asked me, what can we do to solve this problem? My answer is, you can't. What makes you think you can? Have you spent a lifetime trying to figure this stuff out? Probably not. But what you can do is work with people that have, invest in it. Try to find the right approach and people that have been doing this and understand it. And so don't try to do this yourself. These are tough, complex problems. If I could figure it out, gosh, I'd write a book and make money. It's hard. These are hard problems. We all got to be at the table to try to figure this out. So there are a lot of organizations in the STEM area. I've mentioned SOCNAS quite a bit, and it's a tremendous organization. There are a number of organizations that support diversity in STEM, whether it be NSBE, and there's a bunch of acronyms, unfortunately, that I would throw at you. SHIP, organizations that are just ACES. These organizations that support, they're all organizations that are going to support every student. They just want to see the best. They have foci. Some are focused on certain demographics, but whenever you go look at one of these organizations, you're going to find, if you go to SOCNAS, you're going to find, okay, it's 14% white. It's 15% American Indian. It's 10% Black, African American. It's going to have all these, and you're going to say the same thing if you go to NSBE, where it's going to be supporting Black physicists, but I'm a part of NSBE. You're going to see and you're going to see white male counterparts and white women, and they're inclusive societies. And so there's a lot of these organizations that have been around for a long time. They've been working for 30, 40 years plus in terms of trying to advance diversity in STEM. And they're great resources. And having had the privilege of serving as president of one of them, I can tell you they're always looking for partners and people to work with to advance the mission. And that's the best way to do it. Don't try to take these battles all on your own. Work with those that can help.
That's fantastic. And to your point, the fact that those organizations are so inclusive, it just reinforces your point about it being a team effort, about it being, it's not just one group that can solve it. It's everybody working together to solve it and to get us to that point. And absolutely, we can include those links in the description as well as our YouTube video and website. So we can have links to those organizations if those of you are interested. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me, Dr. Montaño, and thank you to everyone out there for listening to this podcast. If you would like to learn more about the National Atomic Testing Museum or Northern Arizona University and the Center for Materials Interfaces and Research and Applications, you can visit our website at nationalatomictestingmuseum.org, nau.edu, mira.nau.edu. And you can find the NATM on Facebook and Twitter by searching Atomic Museum. And once again, Dr. Montaño, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you on today.
Thanks. The pleasure was all mine.